Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone who's registered and attending today. We're really excited to kick off this initiative titled PaReNts Advancing Research Networks, or as you will see it referred to throughout the year, PaReNts. And today we have with us Maureen Smith, who is an expert at patient and researcher engagement, and we're really excited to hear from her. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're glad that everybody's here, and we look forward to having you back next week, and we'll finish up with some information on the next webinar. So today what we'll talk about is, first we're going to get to know everybody with some polls, and then we're going to talk about PCORI and the Eugene Washington Award and how that relates to ACD and this project. And we're also going to learn about patient engagement basics, what core outcome sets are, and what patient-reported outcomes are. And then at the very end, we will have a question and answer section. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll talk about what the next steps are for this project. So let's do some polling. First question, you should see it pop up for you. What region are you joining from today? Okay, so far we've got one family in Canada, 9 in the US, and 1 in Asia. If you haven't clicked on that answer yet, go ahead and, yep, we've got some more in the US. Our friends in Australia don't seem to have woken up yet. Okay, great. So mostly US families joining us today, as well as Canada and Asia. Great. Okay, next question. Which disorder are you here representing? Okay, we've got about 90% representation from CTD families and about 10% GAMT. Great. And then last question, how's everybody doing? I know it's been a long week for me, and I'm going to go ahead and say that the dog that best describes my mood, well, right now, the dog that best describes my mood is number 7, but shortly after this meeting, it's going to be number 3. Oh, and we lost, hold on. We've got almost everyone is number 3. Oh no. Well, we're gonna wake you up because this is gonna be fun, and Maureen has some really great information put together, and I think when you are able to put all these pieces together and learn about this project, you're going to be really excited. So hang in there with us, and we'll get you to the weekend really soon. So like I mentioned, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll watch those as the webinar goes on, and we'll answer them at the end, and ask lots of questions. We want to make sure that you end this session feeling like you really understand the topics and that you're ready for the next webinar. So Maureen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi and Faith, and welcome everyone. Nice to see there's one fellow Canadian on the call. First, I'll introduce myself. So I'm wondering what I'm doing here. Well, I'm a PCORI ambassador, even though I'm Canadian, and I was a member of the Rare Disease Advisory Group for PCORI from 2016 and 2019, which is highly unusual for their advisory group. So usually all Americans, but understanding that rare disease research is really international. I think that's why they invited me to join them. I live in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, and I became involved in rare disease patient advocacy work and patient engagement about 23 years ago. So I was diagnosed with a rare disease at age 8. And so I've been one of those frequent flyers in the healthcare system. So I understand a little bit about pediatric rare diseases from my own experience. And my passion is really to collaborate with researchers so they can meaningfully engage patients and their families. So I'm involved in several studies where I work with research teams to ensure that their patient engagement, is really, sound. And I especially do this in the development of their core outcome sets. And that's where I met Dr. Sylvia Stockler, who I started working with 6 years ago. She'll be presenting the next webinar. And because I've worked with her on a few core outcome set projects for pediatric inherited metabolic disorders, she connected me with your great organization. So I've been involved for, I think it's over a year now, through all the different grant writing. So all this to say that I'm really here to accompany you on your journey. And I look forward to learning about your community and your special needs. So we'll just start with what is PCORI for those of you who don't know. I see there are a lot of Americans here, so you probably have heard about it. It's a non-governmental organization that's been around since 2010. They've just been renewed. So they're definitely here to stay. And they are committed to meaningful patient, caregiver, and stakeholder engagement as a tool for rigorous research. So on to the next slide. And you have been very fortunate. Your organization has worked very hard to secure this Eugene Washington PCORI Engagement Award. That's a picture of Eugene Washington there. I think he was the chair of the first board of governors of PCORI. This is a really exciting award because you're going to build capacity, and the capacity that you're going to build, you're going to have with you the rest of your life. And it's going to lead you down so many different paths in research. So you're going to start with one very specific project, but all of that learning is through the whole research cycle. So if you can see there what the goals are of the project, and it really is throughout the whole research process. So it's going to be, it's great that the PCORI is offering these type of awards to build capacity, and I'm sure that your organization is going to do a great job of doing that. So next slide. So how did we arrive at this point? For those of you who are like history buffs, so this is the slide for you. So I start off in 400 before the common area with Doctor Knows Best, and all the way to today, with different steps along the way, with the rise of the consumer movement, and then the sharing decisions of doctors with their patients. And of course, the big change is the web. I'm sure you all know about that, especially in ultra rare diseases. Now you can communicate with people from all over the world who have the same experiences that you, and you can support each other. That was completely unheard of, 20 years ago. So that's a huge advance in patient engagement. And then open access to publications is really important too. Next slide. So that whole evolution has had many impacts on healthcare, and here's where we are today. So you are part of this culture change. So your project is focused on patient-centered care, and you are changing the roles of patients and their caregivers. And all of these things that are all part of the 21st century healthcare are really all part of what you're going to be working on. So it's really nice to see how healthcare has evolved, and now you've got a really important role in there. Next slide. So just to, a shout out for rare disease research, which is born out of necessity. The collaboration, as you know, is essential to understand the natural history of the diseases, to reach patients, for you to get support. Patients and parents and patients have driven much of the research. Who hasn't seen the movie Lorenzo's Oil, for example? And there are so many other examples of all of the impact that you can have. So it's a really exciting time for rare disease research. Next slide. And just to say that it's a really hot topic. So if you put in that in the search engine, you're getting 86,000 results. And when I started in patient engagement, I used to read every article that came out, and now I have a list, and there's no way that I could possibly keep up. There's just so much there. So it's a growing field all the time, and you're going to be at the forefront of that. So next slide. So just so that you know that PCORI has a definition for what they consider to be patient engagement and research. And that really is meaningful involvement of so patients, their caregivers, clinicians like Dr. Stockler, and other relevant stakeholders. And it's the word meaningful that's the most important one there. And hopefully with the training that you're going to get in this through this entire project, you will be meaningfully involved. Next slide. And PCORI has engagement principles. So here we go with the reciprocal. Is there a syllable missing there? Reciprocal relationships. Okay, reciprocal. Okay, I think there might be a missing syllable. We'll leave it there. Co-learning, partnerships. So this is all about partnerships. Transparency is really important now. And I mean, honesty and trust are developed by having really strong partnerships. So that's all really important engagement principles. And, what are you bringing to the table? Well, you're bringing your passion. I mean, what's more important than your child? You're bringing your expertise. So, you know what it's like to live with that condition. I mean, you've got credibility. You're the one who cares for the child who has that condition. And then you've got that perspective that is so valued to that research team, and in the past would have been completely overlooked. So really important that that's what you're bringing as partners in research. Next slide. And I mean, these are all the reasons that you probably know these, why we engage patients in research. So as I said before, you're the only one who has the lived experience. You're the one who knows which research questions are important to you and your family, and which outcomes are important to you. And I'm going to, again, a lot of those are based around quality of life. You're bringing that real world input. So what's it really like to live with this on the risk tolerance and the interventions? What are you willing to, which risks are you willing to live with, etc. You've got data, which is the new currency. And then you've got the whole focus on patient-centeredness, on the ethics, the safety, the urgency of it, really important. Like how much time can you spend on working on this? And then also, really important, all of the connections to other patients and families like you. And of course, that facilitates recruitment, which is in the rare disease world is really important, and the dissemination of the research findings. So just back to the, next slide. Back to the co-learning. I mean, the goal is not to turn you into researchers. Some of you might already be researchers in your non-medical life and in other areas, but it's really to help you understand and be partners in the research process. So it's like there's room at the table for everyone who plays different roles. So, and at the same time, the healthcare providers and the researchers are also learning. So they're learning about patient-centeredness and what it's like to live with a disease. Next slide. So we often show levels of engagement. And this is just to show you that the goal of this project would be to bring you at the collaborate stage. So it's patient partnered research, as we call it. So you're really partnering with them, and it tells you a little bit about what you're going to be doing. So you're working very closely with them, and that's the level where you would be. The goal of the project is to get you really comfortable in working at that level. And I mean, there is a lot of empowerment involved with that, but it's really about partnership. So next slide. So I like to show this infographic just to show, like people, oh, we're going to engage in research. Oh, that's great. Yeah. But what does it really mean? Like when we say that, what does it look like? And this one is based on clinical trials. But those 4 areas that are in the infographic are really relevant to all healthcare research. So even though we're starting with the development of a core outcome set, which is not a clinical trial, all of what you're learning and all of the skills that you're going to develop are all transferable. So even though this infographic was created with clinical trials in mind, it really is a good way of showing that, where you can be involved and what you can bring to each one of those sections. And I think that when you engage in the development of core outcome sets, the headings might look a little bit different, but your engagement is the skills that you're learning. You can then transfer to all of the stages of a clinical trial. So next slide. So just talking about core outcome sets, we're going to play this video. You can get a little break from listening to me for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. And it's developed by a group called Comet, who are really interested in the development of core outcome sets. They have a working group called Poppy, of which I'm a member of, and we develop videos to help teams who are working with patients on core outcome sets. So I'm going to let the experts here start the video.
Hello, I'm Laura. As a patient with asthma, I'm interested in health research. I think research is the best way to help improve treatments and develop new and better ones. That's why I'm keen to help researchers design studies that make a difference to people's lives. Researchers develop and test treatments to make sure they work and are safe. To do this, they look at the effects treatments have on patients by measuring outcomes. For example, last year I took part in Dr. Smith's study that tested a new asthma treatment. Dr. Smith measured an outcome of how often I used my reliever inhaler before and after taking the new treatment. But there is a problem, because the same outcomes aren't always measured for the same health condition, and different researchers throughout the world often measure different outcomes. So, for example, Dr. Lopez in Spain might be looking at the number of times patients have to go into hospital with their asthma as an outcome, while Dr. Bedi in India may decide to measure nighttime wheeze. When these asthma treatment studies are finished, they can't be compared or combined because they've used different outcomes. It's then difficult to know which treatment is best. It's a bit like trying to compare apples with bananas. This isn't just a challenge for asthma, but for many different health conditions affecting patients throughout the world. So, how can we solve this problem? It's simple, really. If all studies in a particular health condition measure the same set of outcomes, they can be easily compared and combined. Once agreed, this set of outcomes is called a core outcome set. But deciding on which outcomes are core requires discussions and input from the right people. The core outcomes need to be relevant to patients, like me, health professionals, and researchers, so that we can design studies that are more relevant to patients. People working on core outcome sets need to make sure that patients and health professionals both have their say. To do this, they often use consensus methods. Consensus methods include surveys, meetings, and discussions where everybody's views can be heard and taken into account. When a core outcome set has been agreed, the hope is that researchers will use it in all studies for that health condition. We'll be able to learn more about the condition because findings can be compared and combined. In the long run, this means treatments that work will be available to patients more quickly. If you want to find out more information about the core outcome sets, visit www.comet-initiative.org.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully you found that helpful. It's a very general discussion of what a core outcome set is. In this project, you're going to be hearing a lot about patient-reported outcomes. Next week, Dr. Stockler will be really presenting exactly, what your community is going to be doing. But just basically, again, the review of what an outcome is, it's often that end result. But a patient-reported outcome is an end result assessed by the patient or caregiver, in your case, based on how they feel or what they have experienced. So often examples of patient-reported outcomes would be quality of life measures, current pain level, satisfaction with care. Those are all examples of patient-reported outcomes. Okay. So why are they important to our research? Well, they measure things that patients and their caregivers care about. Seems really important. They really are the best way to measure things only a patient or their caregiver would know. And the example again is how do you feel? They are preferred in PCORI research studies because they're patient-centered, and they absolutely will provide valuable insight to your clinicians that allows them to then improve care. Next slide. So just the video talked a little bit about the challenges in measuring outcomes. So just to review, so if we measure different outcomes, we're unable to compare them or combine the result, and that's a big problem. In rare diseases, we really need to work together across clinical centers to conduct research about what treatments are best, and it really is difficult to do that if we're all measuring different outcomes. Next slide. So how do we solve that problem? Well, we agree on a set of main outcomes. So that's where we get the term core outcome set, which would be measured in all trials. And then you'd have all the secondary outcomes that the researcher could also pick from. That way we can bring together different studies to get a better understanding of which treatments are best. And we really can make best use of our resources when we then design new studies. Next slide. So we are making advances in patients and their caregivers being involved in the process of core outcome set development. So if you look at this graph, that looks great. I mean, this was done last year, so it's 2021 data, very encouraging, but not to ruin the party, but actually only about 30% of the core outcome sets in pediatrics include patient participants. So that's an area where there's much work to be done, and even less actually have youth who are able to participate. So it's a field that's advancing, that's becoming really more prominent, but lots of work to do in the pediatric area. So you'll definitely be advancing that. Next slide. So here we go. So why are you involved? Well, you want to make sure that list includes the outcomes that are most relevant to patients and caregivers. And the only way to do that is really to involve you in their development. And we can go back to the science. There are many examples of outcomes that had been overlooked without patient involvement. Next slide. And the big success story is really from the rheumatoid arthritis world. Many years ago, they became involved in selecting core outcome sets, and they, the patients determined that fatigue was an important outcome that should be measured in future studies. Whereas for the doctors, the outcome they were going to all the time was pain. And the patients said, you know what, we learned to deal with the pain, but it's the fatigue that has the biggest impact on our quality of life. And we can say that changed the course of research in that area. So that's one of the common examples that we can give an example. The other one is that when patients are involved, there are more outcomes dealing with quality of life that appear in those core outcome sets than the ones that did not have patient involvement. Next slide. So, you know, as the project progresses, you're going to learn about the whole process, but really, how do we agree? How do we agree upon them is that it requires a great deal of discussion. And that's very interesting because you're going to be interacting with all of these different stakeholders who are involved in your area. And there's a lot of learning that just goes on from that discussion. So you go back and forth through surveys basically and meetings, and then you agree on a core set. Next slide. So you're using a consensus method, which I'm sure you all know about. So there are surveys or meetings or discussions where the opinions of all of the experts are drawn together. And as I said, patients and caregivers were not always involved in this type of work, but now they are being included. And that's because we recognize the importance of their firsthand experience of living with a condition. So next slide. So next week, on next Friday, same time, same place, Dr. Sylvia Stockler, who is an expert in your condition, will be explaining the development of the core outcome sets for creatinine deficiencies and the very important role that you will play. So hopefully with a little bit of background information, next week you can jump right in and enjoy that presentation, because it really will be highly relevant to exactly what you're going to be doing. And I mean, basically it should be, you know, nothing about us without us. So we're hoping that you're not going to miss this opportunity to really share your passion, your expertise, and your credibility. So I'm leaving lots of time for questions, because that was really the goal, was to hear from you. Hopefully I can answer them. If not, I'm sure Heidi, I see Laura's on the call too, and Faith, your leaders of your patient group are here to answer your questions too. And Heidi, did you want me to stop here for the questions? And
yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Maureen. That was so wonderful. I learned a lot from that, and I think our community likely did as well. It's just really eye-opening that we need to be involved in this process so that we don't potentially, you know, not have a great treatment approved for our conditions, or the reverse, have an inappropriate treatment approved. So this is really exciting, and I love the way that you explained all this. I do have one question. Can a core outcome set include patient-reported outcomes as well as clinically reported outcomes?
I'm pretty, I mean, Dr. Stockler will answer that, but I'm pretty sure that yes, there's the whole range of outcomes. There's no rules really about what's really going to be in that core set, as long as all of the people who are building it agree on it. So.
Okay, and then I have a question from someone in India about how they will participate effectively. We will talk about next steps and what that looks like, and Dr. Stockler will talk more about it next week. but just I'll give you a quick answer that the majority of this project will be virtual. So it will be very friendly to people around the world.
I think for me, the big thing is we try to do some training. We try to aim it at, what we think people might want to know, but it's really hard to judge what level people are at. Everyone is welcome here. So whether you've never engaged before, you're brand new, that's fine. That's what we're here to do. We're here to bring you on. So there's never any questions that you shouldn't ask. We don't want to assume that you know everything. We're going to try to speak in non-scientific language, not use acronyms, and make it as accessible as possible so that you can participate in the whole process. And your role in the process is really, really important. And when you participate, that means that the core outcomes are developed in a way that a lot of people from your community can have input because it's understandable to them. I filled out a Delphi survey years ago on a topic that was of high interest to me. I couldn't understand a word of what it said. It was all in medical gobbledygook. I was really discouraged about that. So I think that, it's really important. So when you don't understand something, even if we've gone over it, but you need some more help, you just have to let us know, because we don't want to assume, and we don't want people to leave because they think, oh, this is too scientific. I don't have a degree in science. If my biology teacher saw me now, he would be shocked, because I'm a teacher by training. So, it's all doable. If you're interested and you're willing to learn, it's doable.
Great. We have a couple more. Who ultimately determines the outcome set, and are participants allowed to suggest measured outcomes?
So absolutely, that's part of the process, is to get the list of what's important to you. That's one of the steps. So you will be asked, what are the outcomes that are important to you? The final list will be decided at a consensus meeting. And you will be, the last meeting that I was at, 30% of the people at the meeting were patients. Well, they were parents, it was a pediatric. So you're going to have your voice heard all the way through. And the goal is to reach a consensus with those researchers and those clinicians who are working in that area. They have their expertise too, and you've got your expertise, and you bring that together and you create a list.
And how is the consensus shared with the greater scientific community?
Right. So usually you would write it up, publish or perish. So that's really important, that you're going to probably register the fact that you're going to do this work on the COMET website, so everyone in the world knows. You go in there and you would look and see, creatinine, who's working in that area, so that all the scientists in the world know. And then when you do have your list at the end, once again, having patient partners is essential to getting the word out. You are very well connected. The doctors are not connected the way you are. You are the people who have all those connections. So you've got to translate that into a way that's understandable by everyone in your community. That's another thing that the skills that you're going to learn in this project is, how do you get the word out, and what's an effective way of doing that, so that those core outcomes don't sit on a shelf, basically, and not be used by researchers. Now, when you have a small community like you have, you're probably at an advantage for that, because it'll be very innovative that you've got this list of core outcomes, and there should be a lot of interest in it.
That's great. Another question. I understand that the process includes researchers, patients, and care teams. At any point, do lawmakers or any other community leaders get brought in as well for their broad level input?
right? So sometimes you would include on your team who are looking at the outcomes and get the opinion of some funders, for example. You may have like funders of research. You may have people who do health technology assessment. So the people who are giving reports in, you have to think ahead. So if we do research now and we use these outcomes, who's going to fund this research? Who's going to approve of these drugs? They're going to look at this. Oh, look, they based all of their clinical trials on these core outcomes. So you have to think ahead, and you've got to try to include as many of those people as you can when you're sending out your questionnaires, to try to get as many voices as possible. They're not always easy to get those people. They're not going to knock at your door. You probably have to do a lot of work, but like, for example, the FDA recognizes the importance of core outcome sets. So if you're submitting, a request for a new drug, they're going to look and see, are they basing their clinical trial, and have they looked at, and are they looking at the outcomes from core outcomes sets? There's a lot of encouragement to be using that.
Great. And that ties in really well to this next question. It's, once outcomes are agreed upon and set, how are stakeholders held to them, and what checks and balances are in place to ensure compliance of implementing outcomes?
That's a really good question. So it's kind of like an honor system, but there are like now that core outcome sets are becoming more popular, you may get a requirement from a funder or somebody that you're submitting your research to, like, are you following this outcome set? So that's becoming more popular to do that. But I think that depends. I know a little bit about Canada. I don't know so much about the checks and balances in the United States, but we're definitely moving towards that, because people are realizing that it's really important. It also eliminates a lot of research waste, which is a huge topic. So you're not, so yes, so it's hard to say exactly how compliant people have to be. Normally they're very well received. Like, I know that you have a registry. They're very well received for working with registries. So you're making sure that you're collecting data on those outcomes too, because they're going to be used in clinical trials. So they open the door to a lot of different areas in clinical trials that you're going to be doing in the future.
Thank you. That makes sense. And it would seem, if the FDA has come accustomed to looking for these, that even if someone were to apply for an investigational new drug, the FDA would be asking, what are the core outcome sets that have been established on this? And if they have not included those, they would probably be questioned as to why they ignored those core outcome sets and what their justification was. So I think it sounds like there is some built-in accountability, just as you said, the handshake between groups. Right. Yeah, that's great.
And they're easy to find because they're registered. So people who work on that, I mean, Dr. Stockler will lead that. She'll probably register it, and they'll be written up. So, it's not like it's a Where's Waldo where you have to look for them. Just go on one website, you type in creatinine, it'll pop up. So, so they are, there's no reason to say, oh, I didn't know they were there, because, it's not that hard to find. So I think, and there's been a lot of work in that area to make sure that people know about them and provide resources to groups too. So
that's great. That's great. Well, thank you. This has been so informative. I'm going to move on to one of our last slides about the next steps in this project. So as we've said several times, there is a webinar a week from today. It will be 1 hour earlier than the webinar today. And if you haven't registered, this little screenshot of our website is the creatinginfo.org/parents-project page, where there's a lot of Q&A about this project. There is a spot where you can apply to be one of the 20 families that will participate in the project. And also at the very bottom, there's a link to register for next week's webinar. So it is not too late to join. If you have friends in the community that weren't able to make it, let them know they're not too late. We've recorded today's webinar and we'll post it. And we do want everyone who applies to have watched both webinars so they understand what we are trying to do, and they're sure that they are excited and ready to make the commitment. So spread the word, and we're excited to get this project going. One more thing, there's a really great tool. So if you are ending this and going, I really want to know more about PCORI, the group that is funding this, and why are they so interested in patient-centered outcomes, and how can I have a better base coming into these conversations? There is a website, PCORI.org/engagement/research-fundamentals. And it's basically a class where you can log in and you go through different modules of learning. You can pause it, come back to it later. You set your own pace, and it's free and it's accessible, and it's just a really great resource. Maureen, did you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not mandatory, but sometimes people say, well, I would just like to know more. So that's a good place to go. And I just want to, again, back on research fundamentals, there's no prerequisite that you're a scientist to join this, or that you have any kind of professional training. I really want to stress that your expertise is your role as a parent and taking care of your child, and everything else that you need to learn to participate in this project, you can easily learn. So I sometimes I hear people say, oh, I don't have any formal training in research. No, we've got people on the team who have formal training in research. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, your passion, your lived experience, your willingness to embark on this journey. And I really hope that I've been able to, at least give you some basics and convince you that there's room for everyone, no matter what your level is. And that I know that your organization is making the commitment to work with you. And if after this webinar, you start thinking about something and you think of a question that you might have asked that you didn't ask, never too late. Just send it to Heidi, and somebody from the team or myself personally will answer you. Don't let anything stop you if you really want to do this. And I'm talking to parents of kids with rare disorders. We are a resilient community. I mean, this kind of thing was just custom made for us. I mean, this is an incredible community that has faced so many challenges. So I really hope that, this is a way of embarking you on the journey and letting you know that it's for everyone who's interested. So hopefully I made that point really clearly, because I would have never thought, years ago, that I would even be doing this. I didn't think I had the capacity to do that. And you learn little by little by little, and you just keep building your skills because you're passionate and you want to do it. So don't let anything that you heard today discourage you. Just let us know, I'm concerned about this, or I'd like to do it, but tell us what that but is, and let's see if we can figure out a way around that.
That's great.
Enough for me.
That's wonderful. That's perfect. Well said. I feel exactly the same, Maureen. You just have to jump in, and you'll realize what an expert you already are just from your lived experiences with your child. So thank you everyone for attending. We look forward to this project and working with you and getting to know everybody better. And if you have questions, if you have concerns, my email address is right here. Send me an email anytime and I will get back with you. And at the end of this Zoom, when you leave, you should see a screen pop up with a very short survey. We just want to know, what you learned about, what you still have questions about, kind of where you're at the end of this, so we can do better next time. And thank you again, Maureen. We really appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Have a great
you.
weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.